This is the challenge and the threat behind those who are abusing their power in more brazen ways than I ever would have imagined.
Tulsi Gabbard stood firmly at the center of the storm when she delivered a scathing dismantling of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that left the political world buzzing. The clash between the two was not one of fleeting words tossed in the heat of the moment, but rather a carefully aimed strike that landed with precision. Gabbard, known for her bluntness and unwillingness to bend to party expectations, turned her full focus on AOC in a way that highlighted not only ideological divides, but also deep fractures within the progressive movement itself. What unfolded was more than a disagreement. It was an unmasking, a moment where the air shifted, and a prominent figure of the progressive left found herself stripped of the aura that had once shielded her from harsher criticism. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The exchange began with Gabbard identifying the contradictions that many had noticed, but few dared to voice in such a direct way. AOC had built her reputation on grassroots authenticity, a fiery willingness to call out corruption and entrenched power structures, yet Gabbard pointed out how far the Congresswoman had drifted from those beginnings. The attack was not based on vague insinuations, but on concrete examples of how AOC's rhetoric no longer matched her actions. For Gabbard, the issue wasn't simply about political posturing, but about integrity, about the failure to remain consistent in the face of influence, pressure, and ambition. That framing instantly raised the stakes, because it suggested that what was at risk wasn't just a single policy stance, but the credibility of AOC herself. The force of Gabbard's delivery lay in its calm, methodical nature. She didn't rant or raise her voice. Instead, she outlined her points with the kind of controlled intensity that made them unavoidable. Every observation came across less as an opinion and more as a piercing truth. She exposed the gap between AOC's early image as a working-class champion and her later alignment with the very forces she once condemned. This rhetorical approach left AOC with little room to maneuver, because it stripped away the defense of politics as usual that many rely upon when contradictions are exposed. Gabbard framed her critique as a matter of authenticity, and when someone is accused of losing authenticity, the damage to their public image cuts deeper than any single policy disagreement. As the moment unfolded, the audience and observers recognized that this was not just a routine skirmish between two politicians. The weight of Gabbard's words carried the sense that she was voicing frustrations that had long been simmering beneath the surface among progressives and independents alike. AOC had risen with unprecedented speed, embraced as a symbol of generational change, yet that very pedestal made her vulnerable to being toppled if she appeared to betray the principles that elevated her in the first place. Gabbard leaned directly into this vulnerability, showing how the pedestal could be turned into a platform for accountability rather than adulation. The implications for AOC's career in that moment were severe. When a politician's image rests so heavily on the perception of authenticity, the erosion of that image can happen rapidly. Gabbard didn't just argue that AOC had made a mistake. She implied that her entire political persona had become a performance disconnected from reality. That suggestion, once planted, is difficult to erase. It reframes every future statement AOC might make, casting doubt over whether it is genuine conviction or carefully calculated branding. For a figure who thrived on the perception of speaking truth to power, such doubt becomes corrosive. The public reception magnified the effect. Many who had quietly questioned AOC's trajectory suddenly had their doubts validated in high definition. Gabbard's dismantling provided a vocabulary for those frustrations, crystallizing them into a narrative that was impossible to ignore. The fact that it came from someone outside the traditional partisan establishment added further weight. Gabbard had long distanced herself from the machinery of her own party, which gave her words an independence that made them land with greater credibility. The scene became one of an outsider calling out someone who was supposed to be an outsider, but who, in Gabbard's telling, had become fully enmeshed in the establishment. From that point, the implications radiated outward. AOC's allies suddenly faced the challenge of defending her without reinforcing Gabbard's accusations. Her opponents, meanwhile, seized the opportunity to echo the points and deepen the perception that the Congresswoman had become a hollow figure. Political media latched onto the story because it wasn't just about a policy clash, but about a symbolic unraveling. When someone widely seen as the face of a movement is accused of abandoning its values, it becomes a story that transcends politics and enters cultural conversation. The psychological dimension of the clash should not be underestimated either. AOC's strength had always been her ability to project confidence and certainty, to position herself as the bold voice willing to say what others wouldn't. Yet Gabbard's dismantling undercut that very projection. By calling attention to the inconsistencies, she forced AOC into a position where her confidence no longer looked like strength, but like deflection. That inversion of perception is devastating in politics, where image and narrative often matter more than substance. Once confidence is reframed as arrogance or inauthenticity, the ground beneath a politician's career begins to shake. Observers who watched closely could see how Gabbard had essentially pulled off a classic strategy. She didn't just attack her opponent's policies, she attacked the foundation of her persona. That distinction is crucial. A politician can recover from losing a debate over healthcare or climate policy, but it is far harder to recover when the very identity that has defined one's rise is torn apart. By zeroing in on authenticity, Gabbard went straight for the core of what made AOC resonate. And in doing so, she destabilized the entire framework upon which that resonance was built. The ripple effects extended beyond the two women themselves. The progressive movement, already fractured by internal disputes, found itself forced to confront uncomfortable questions. If AOC could be accused of losing authenticity, then what did that say about the broader direction of the movement? Was it becoming more about branding and personality than about principles and policy? Gabbard's words pushed those questions to the forefront, leaving activists and voters to wrestle with whether their champions were living up to the ideals that had inspired them. In that way, the confrontation was not just about AOC's career, but about the credibility of the progressive project as a whole. For Gabbard, the moment elevated her stature in unexpected ways. While she had often been dismissed as a contrarian or an outsider, her takedown of AOC positioned her as someone unafraid to confront sacred cows within the political left. It demonstrated that she could command attention, not by pandering to popular figures, but by challenging them directly. That shift in perception marked a turning point for how she was seen, especially among those who valued independence over party loyalty. By choosing AOC as the target of her sharpest critique, Gabbard ensured that her words would reverberate far more widely than if she had chosen a less prominent figure. What made the entire event particularly gripping was the sheer imbalance of expectation versus outcome. AOC had long been perceived as untouchable in debates, skilled at wielding rhetoric and commanding attention. To see her dismantled so effectively created a sense of shock, as though an unspoken rule had just been broken. That shock magnified the damage, because it suggested vulnerability where many had assumed invulnerability. Political careers often hinge less on actual defeats than on the perception of weakness. And in that moment, Gabbard had forced the perception of weakness into the spotlight. The moment also underscored the fragility of political stardom. AOC's rapid rise had created a level of fame unusual for someone so early in their career. But that fame carried the risk of being built on an unstable foundation. The higher the pedestal, the more devastating the fall when it comes. Gabbard's critique made visible the cracks that fame had concealed, showing that beneath the carefully crafted image lay contradictions that could no longer be ignored. The spectacle served as a reminder that in politics, the same qualities that lift someone to prominence can also become the vectors of their downfall. For those who had followed AOC's journey closely, the dismantling was both riveting and sobering. It was riveting because of the sheer intensity with which Gabbard executed her strike, but sobering because it revealed how precarious AOC's position truly was. The aura of inevitability that had surrounded her career evaporated in an instant, replaced by uncertainty about whether her trajectory would continue upward or begin to decline. That uncertainty was perhaps the greatest damage of all, because it shifted the conversation from "what will AOC accomplish next?" to "can AOC recover at all?" The broader political landscape was also reshaped. The clash highlighted the internal contradictions within the Democratic Party, where figures like AOC were expected to push boundaries while still operating within the constraints of political reality. Gabbard's dismantling exposed how difficult it was to balance those roles. It showed that the image of rebellion could not coexist indefinitely with the compromises of governance without eventually inviting charges of hypocrisy. For the party as a whole, the moment raised questions about the sustainability of its progressive wing and the challenges of managing figures whose brand depended on being unmanageable. The cultural resonance extended beyond party politics. The event became a parable of authenticity versus performance, a reflection of broader societal concerns about truth, branding, and the gap between image and reality. In a world where social media magnifies personas and amplifies contradictions, the dismantling of AOC by Gabbard symbolized a deeper cultural unease. It spoke to the fear that even those who rise on the promise of honesty and disruption can eventually become absorbed into the very systems they set out to challenge. That theme gave the confrontation an enduring relevance that stretched far beyond its immediate political context. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Tulsi exposing AOC's weaknesses in politics? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.